The annals of criminal history are filled with masterminds who spent years evading capture through meticulous planning and genius-level intellect. We often think of the criminal underworld as a place of shadows and secrets where the slightest mistake can lead to a lifetime behind bars. Yet for every criminal genius who vanishes into the night with millions in diamonds, there is another who stumbles into the spotlight through sheer incompetence. Today on Midnight Docket, we are examining a case that defies all logic and reason. This is the story of a man whose ego was so inflated and whose grasp on reality was so tenuous that he did the one thing no criminal should ever do. He called the police to complain. Our story takes us back to the neon-soaked streets of 1995, in a bustling American metropolis where crime rates were high and police were overworked. In this chaotic environment, it was easy for a petty thief to slip through the cracks of the justice system. The city was a sprawling maze of concrete and glass, where shadows offered sanctuary to those who lived outside the law. It was here that a man named Arthur Pendelton decided to make his mark on the world. Arthur was not a violent man by nature, but he possessed a profound sense of entitlement that would eventually become his undoing. He believed he was smarter than everyone else in the room, including the detectives who would later laugh while listening to his confession. Arthur Pendelton was a career criminal who specialized in residential burglaries and small-time theft. He was a man of average height and build with a face that blended easily into a crowd. He considered himself a professional in the art of acquisition. He spent his days scouting potential targets in wealthy neighborhoods, and his nights dreaming of the one big score that would allow him to retire to a tropical paradise. Arthur studied the habits of his victims with the intensity of a scholar. He watched when they left for work and when they returned. He noted which houses had dogs and which ones had alarm systems. In his mind, he was a phantom who could walk through walls and leave no trace behind. The year 1995 was a time of technological transition. Cell phones were becoming more common, but they were still bulky and expensive. Most people relied on landlines and payphones. The internet was in its infancy and surveillance cameras were not yet ubiquitous on every street corner. This lack of digital oversight gave criminals like Arthur a false sense of security. He believed that as long as he wore gloves and kept his face covered, he was invisible. He did not account for the human element of error or the unpredictability of his own temper. Arthur had a short fuse and a tendency to hold grudges against anyone he felt had wronged him. On a cool evening in late October, Arthur set his sights on a large two-story colonial house in a quiet, affluent suburb. The house belonged to the Harrison family, who were away on a 2-week vacation in Europe. Arthur had been watching the property for days and knew that the house was empty. He had seen the neighbors collecting the mail and the lights on timers turning on and off with clockwork precision. It was the perfect target. A secluded location with high hedges and a backyard that opened up into a dense patch of woods. Arthur believed this would be the easiest job of his career. He did not know that fate had a cruel twist in store for him. Arthur prepared for the burglary with his usual ritual. He dressed in dark clothing from head to toe and packed a small duffel bag with his tools. He carried a pry bar and a flashlight and a roll of duct tape. He parked his battered sedan 2 streets over to avoid drawing attention to himself. As he walked toward the Harrison residence, the autumn leaves crunched softly under his boots. The air was crisp and smelled of wood smoke. Arthur felt a surge of adrenaline as he approached the back gate. He slipped into the yard and moved through the shadows like a predator stalking its prey. He reached the back door and began to work on the lock. The lock on the back door was a simple mechanism that yielded easily to the skills Arthur had honed over a decade of petty crime. With a soft click, the door swung open, and Arthur stepped into the kitchen. The house was silent and smelled of lemon polish and stale air. He clicked on his flashlight and swept the beam across the room. Stainless steel appliances and granite countertops gleamed in the darkness. Arthur smiled to himself. He knew that a house this nice would be full of valuables. He moved quickly into the living room, scanning for electronics and silverware and jewelry. He was looking for items that were small and valuable and easy to fence. As Arthur moved through the house, he began to gather items into a pile in the center of the living room rug. He found a collection of sterling silver flatware in the dining room buffet. He found a high-end video camera in the den. Upstairs in the master bedroom, he discovered a jewelry box filled with gold necklaces and diamond earrings. Arthur was ecstatic. This haul was worth thousands of dollars. He worked efficiently and quietly, taking care not to disturb anything that might leave a trace. He felt like the king of the world. He was in complete control of the situation, or so he thought. After an hour of rummaging through the Harrison home, Arthur decided it was time to leave. He had filled 2 large pillowcases with loot, and his duffel bag was heavy with silver. He carried the bags down to the back door and set them down. He planned to make 2 trips to his car. He picked up the first bag and stepped out into the cool night air. He walked quickly to the back gate and checked the street. It was empty. He jogged to his car and tossed the bag into the trunk. He felt a rush of triumph. He was halfway home. He hurried back to the house to retrieve the second bag. When Arthur returned to the back door, he found it exactly as he had left it. He stepped inside and grabbed the second bag. As he turned to leave, he noticed something on the kitchen counter that he had missed before. It was a bottle of expensive scotch. Arthur paused. He had a weakness for fine liquor. He decided to take a quick swig to celebrate his success. He uncorked the bottle and took a long pull. The warmth of the alcohol spread through his chest. He took another drink and then another. He sat down at the kitchen table and rested his feet on a chair. He told himself he had plenty of time. The minutes ticked by as Arthur enjoyed the scotch. The adrenaline of the burglary began to fade and was replaced by a warm, fuzzy feeling of intoxication. He started to look around the kitchen with a critical eye. He noticed that the countertops were cluttered with mail, and the sink was full of dirty dishes that the family had left behind in their rush to leave for vacation. Arthur frowned. He was a man who appreciated order and cleanliness. The mess offended his sensibilities. He muttered to himself about the laziness of rich people. He took another drink and stood up, swaying slightly. Arthur decided to explore the house one more time. He wandered back into the living room and turned on the television. He sat on the plush sofa and flipped through the channels. He found a late-night talk show and settled in to watch. He had completely forgot about the urgency of his mission. He was treating the house as if it were his own. He laughed loudly at the jokes on the screen and poured himself another glass of scotch. The line between criminal and houseguest was blurring in his alcohol-addled mind. He was losing his edge. As the night wore on, Arthur began to feel hungry. He went to the refrigerator and opened the door. He was disappointed to find only condiments and a few wilted vegetables. He slammed the door shut in frustration. He opened the pantry and found boxes of crackers and cans of soup. He grumbled about the lack of decent food. His sense of entitlement was growing with every passing minute. He felt that if he was going to rob a house, the least the owners could do was leave some good snacks. He was starting to feel personally insulted by the Harrison family. It was at this point that Arthur made a discovery that would change the course of the night. He opened a closet in the hallway and found a wall safe. His eyes lit up. A safe meant cash or serious jewelry. He ran to get his tools and began to work on the safe. He pried and hammered and twisted, but the safe would not budge. It was a high-quality model that required a combination or a professional drill. Arthur did not have the skills or the tools to crack it. He became increasingly agitated. He struck the safe with his pry bar and cursed loudly. Arthur spent the next hour trying to break into the safe. He tried every trick he knew, but nothing worked. He was sweating and panting, and his hands were blistered. The alcohol was fueling his rage. He felt like the safe was mocking him. He started to shout at the walls. He accused the homeowners of being cheap and deceitful. He felt that he had worked hard to get into the house, and he deserved whatever was in that safe. His logic had completely collapsed. He was no longer a thief trying to escape. He was an aggrieved customer, demanding satisfaction. In his drunken state, Arthur came up with a plan that made perfect sense to him at the time. He decided that he needed help to open the safe. He looked around for a phone. He found a cordless phone on the kitchen counter. He picked it up and dialed the only number he could think of that could help him in an emergency. He dialed 911. He did not think about the police. He thought about getting assistance. He thought about rectifying the injustice of the locked safe. He waited for the operator to answer. The emergency dispatcher on the other end of the line was a woman named Sarah Jenkins. She had been working the night shift for 10 years and had heard everything from prank calls to horrific tragedies. When her headset beeped, she answered with her standard professional greeting. 911, what is your emergency? She expected a car accident or a medical crisis. She did not expect a slurred voice on the other end, complaining about a defective safe. Arthur began to explain his situation in a rambling, incoherent monologue. Arthur told the dispatcher that he was at a house and he was trying to open a safe, but it was stuck. He explained that he had been trying for an hour and his hands were hurting. He demanded that someone come over and bring a drill or a master key. Sarah was confused. She asked Arthur if it was his safe. Arthur replied indignantly that it was not his safe, but he was the one trying to open it, so he should have access. Sarah realized quickly that something was very wrong. She signaled her supervisor and began to trace the call. Sarah kept Arthur talking. She asked him for the address, which Arthur foolishly provided. He read the address off a piece of mail on the counter. Sarah asked him his name. Arthur hesitated for a moment, but then gave her a fake name. He said his name was John Smith. Sarah asked him what he was doing at the house. Arthur said he was just visiting, and he needed to get something out of the safe before he left. He sounded like a frustrated child. Sarah typed the address into her computer and dispatched 2 patrol cars to the scene. While the police were on their way, Arthur continued to complain to the dispatcher. He started listing all the things that were wrong with the house. He complained about the dirty dishes in the sink. He complained about the lack of food in the fridge. He complained that the television remote had dead batteries. He was airing a laundry list of grievances against the victims he was currently robbing. It was a surreal conversation. Sarah listened patiently and urged him to stay on the line. She told him that help was on the way. Arthur felt a sense of relief. He believed that a locksmith or a maintenance man was coming to help him. He poured himself another drink and went back to the living room. He sat down and waited. He did not look out the window. He did not check for sirens. He was completely oblivious to the reality of his situation. He was a burglar who had called the police on himself because he was dissatisfied with the quality of the burglary. It was a level of absurdity that would make headlines around the world. 10 minutes later, a patrol car turned onto the quiet suburban street. The officers cut their sirens and lights as they approached the Harrison residence. They parked a few houses down and approached on foot. They had been informed that there was a possible burglary in progress, and the suspect was on the phone with dispatch. They moved cautiously with their hands on their holsters. They saw the light on in the living room and the shadow of a man moving around inside. They crept up to the front door and listened. Inside the house, Arthur was still on the phone. He was asking the dispatcher how long it would take for the help to arrive. He said he was getting tired and he wanted to go home. Sarah told him they would be there any minute. Suddenly, there was a loud pounding on the front door. Arthur jumped up. He thought his help had arrived. He walked to the door and unlocked it. He swung the door open with a smile on his face, expecting to see a workman with a toolbox. Instead of a handyman, Arthur was greeted by two uniformed police officers with their guns drawn. They shouted for him to get on the ground. Arthur was stunned. He dropped the phone and stared at them in disbelief. He tried to explain that there had been a mistake. He said he had called for help with the safe, not for the police. The officers did not want to hear his explanations. They grabbed him and forced him to the floor. They handcuffed his hands behind his back and read him his rights. As Arthur was being led out of the house in handcuffs, the alcohol began to wear off, and the gravity of his situation started to sink in. He realized what he had done. He had called the police on himself. He looked at the officers and asked if they could at least open the safe for him so he could see what was inside. The officers laughed and shook their heads. They told him that the only thing inside for him was a long prison sentence. They placed him in the back of the patrol car and drove him to the station. The story of Arthur Pendelton spread through the police station like wildfire. Every cop in the precinct wanted to see the man who called 911 to complain about a safe he was trying to rob. The detectives who interviewed him could barely keep straight faces. They played the recording of the 911 call back to him. Arthur sat in the interrogation room with his head in his hands. He listened to his own slurred voice, demanding customer service during a felony. It was the ultimate moment of humiliation. The trial of Arthur Pendelton was a brief affair. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The prosecution played the tape of the call for the jury. The jurors tried to stifle their laughter, but it was impossible. The defense attorney had very little to work with. He tried to argue that Arthur was temporarily insane due to intoxication, but the judge was not impressed. Arthur was convicted of burglary and attempted theft. He was sentenced to 10 years in state prison. While in prison, Arthur became a minor celebrity among the inmates. He was known as the man who called the cops. Some inmates mocked him, while others shook their heads in disbelief. Arthur spent his time in the prison library reading books on law and criminal justice. He tried to appeal his case, arguing that the police had entrapped him by answering his call for help. The appeals were swiftly denied. Arthur served 7 years of his sentence before being released on parole. The legacy of Arthur Pendelton serves as a cautionary tale for criminals everywhere. It highlights the dangers of hubris and the unpredictable nature of human stupidity. Most criminals are caught because of forensic evidence or witness testimony. Arthur was caught because he could not handle a minor inconvenience without complaining to the authorities. His need for validation and assistance outweighed his instinct for self-preservation. He remains one of the most foolish criminals in the history of the justice system. Today, the Harrison house still stands on that quiet suburban street. The family eventually moved away, but the story of the burglary remains a local legend. Neighbors still tell the tale of the thief who got drunk and called 911. It is a story that is retold at dinner parties and bar gatherings. It is a reminder that truth is often stranger than fiction. In the world of crime, there are masterminds and there are fools. And then there is Arthur Pendelton, who occupies a category all his own. As we reflect on this case, we are left with a lingering question about the nature of the criminal mind. What drives a person to commit a crime is often a complex mix of desperation and greed. But what drives a person to incriminate themselves so spectacularly is a mystery of psychology. Perhaps deep down Arthur wanted to be caught. Perhaps his subconscious was crying out for an end to his life of crime. Or perhaps he was just a man who really wanted to know what was in that safe. We may never know for sure. The world of true crime is usually dark and disturbing. It is filled with tragedy and loss. But occasionally a case comes along that offers a moment of levity amidst the gloom. The case of the complaining burglar is one such story. It allows us to laugh at the absurdity of the human condition. It reminds us that even those who live outside the law are subject to the same petty frustrations as the rest of us. They too get annoyed when things do not work as they should. So the next time you find yourself frustrated with a locked door or a broken appliance, take a deep breath and remember Arthur. Remember that it could always be worse. You could be the man who called the police to complain that his burglary was not going according to plan. In the end, justice was served not by a brilliant detective or a high-tech surveillance system, but by the criminal's own folly. And that is perhaps the most satisfying conclusion of all.